All right, today we're going to dive into a really fascinating argument from our source material. It's this idea that one single change to an ancient text could have, well, completely changed the course of theological history. But, we're not going to jump straight into some dense, heavy debate. Nope, we're going to start with a story. Kind of like a parable, really, that lets the logic of the situation just speak for itself. Okay, so let's set the scene here. Our story is all about lost honor, and it centers on two generals right after a huge victory. So on one side, you've got General Petrov. He's the 4-star supreme commander, the big picture guy, right? He's the master strategist who designs the entire battle plan. And then you have General Marcus, the 2-star field commander. His job? Simple. He executes Petrov's orders faithfully on the ground. The roles are super distinct, there's a clear hierarchy, no confusion whatsoever. Okay, now fast forward a few decades. A historian is writing about this incredible victory. But here's the twist. Instead of using General Petrov's name, he just calls him the commander. He thinks, this sounds more respectful, more reverent. But one of General Petrov's descendants? She is not having it. And listen to the word she uses. She says, that is not reverence, that is erasure. She argues that taking away his name doesn't honor him. It robs him of his identity. It makes him anonymous instead of celebrating him. So hang on to that powerful idea, erasure, because now we're going to see how this little story connects to what our source material describes as an ancient and absolutely crucial event. So here's the core argument from our source material, what happened to our fictional General Petrov. It's the exact same thing that happened in many translations of ancient scriptures. A very specific, personal name got swapped out for a generic title. And we are not talking about some minor edit here. The personal name of God shows up almost 7,000 times in the original Hebrew manuscripts. I mean, this was a massive, foundational part of the text. Right, so that name is represented by these 4 Hebrew letters, YHWH. You might have heard it called the Tetragrammaton. In English, it usually gets translated as Jehovah or Yahweh. And the key thing to remember is, this isn't a title like God or Lord. It's a personal name. So what happens logically when you take a name that appears thousands of times and just replace it with a title? Well, our next section gets into how that one substitution, according to our source, created a domino effect from simple ambiguity all the way to a major dogma. Let's look at a case study the source brings up, Psalm 110, verse 1. The argument goes like this. The original sense was something like, Jehovah said to my Lord. See, 2 totally distinct individuals. But when you make that substitution, it becomes, the Lord said to my Lord. And suddenly, wait, who's talking to whom? The source claims this just muddies the waters completely. And this is really the heart of the argument. It suggests that this substitution created a big question mark, a real point of confusion. And to solve what it calls a man-made confusion, a brand new theological explanation was needed. Enter the doctrine of the Trinity. And that leads us right to the central question this whole explainer is built around. What if this big theological puzzle wasn't some deep divine mystery at all? What if it was just a self-inflicted problem, created by taking the original clarity out of the text? Okay, so let's try to reverse engineer this thing. Let's go back to what the source calls the Bible's blueprints and just see what other scriptures have to say about the relationship between God the Father and his Son, Jesus. First up, the source points us to something Jesus himself said, right out of the book of John. And the takeaway here, according to this argument, is that this points to a clear hierarchy, not co-equality, but a relationship where one is greater. Okay, next piece of evidence. This one comes from the Apostle Paul's letter to the Corinthians. And the argument here is that this language, this analogy of a head, implies a very clear chain of command. And for a third example, there's a verse that's all about function, separating the role of God from the role of the mediator, which, from this perspective, pretty clearly defines 2 separate and distinct roles. You've got the ultimate authority, and then you have the go-between. All right, this brings us to our final section, where the whole argument comes together. It lays out how, according to this line of thinking, just putting the original name back in its place clears everything up. So here's the whole idea in a nutshell. The source basically says, when the name is taken out, you get what looks like contradictions, and you need these really complex doctrines to explain them away. But, it claims, when you put the name back in, all that complexity just vanishes. It's replaced by what it calls a clear hierarchy and a simple logical truth. So this is the picture that emerges when you follow this line of reasoning. You have Jehovah, the Almighty God, the Father, right at the top. And then under his authority, you have Jesus Christ, his son, the one who is the appointed Lord. It's just like what we saw with General Petrov, the strategist, and General Marcus, the field commander, a clear relationship. So we'll leave you with a final, pretty powerful question that this whole analysis raises. The main idea we've unpacked is that removing a name can create a whole lot of confusion, while putting it back can bring clarity. And that leads to a much bigger thought, right? If this one single change could have such a massive impact, what else might we understand differently if we just looked a little closer at the original text?